Welcome, I Love You Period Revolution Nation. I am so excited and deeply humbled and honored to be having a conversation today with Gary Williams. Many of you may know Gary from his days in golf. In fact, he's one of the more recognizable voices in the history of the sport. And he's also done some interviews that are iconic. He had the last on-screen interview with Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Gary Player, and Lee Trevino. And that's been amazing. But the amazing man I want to bring to you today is one that has an incredible redemption story. And his willingness to be authentic in sharing that is going to be impactful to you, I'm sure of it. We would call it his I Love You Period story. So join me now as I have this conversation with a dear friend, Gary Williams.
Man, I am excited to be here with you, Gary. And I know I follow a trail of a lot of people who call you a dear friend. And it's just a privilege to be here and to be talking to you under the I Love You Period kind of redemption story, and something you and I've been talking about for a couple years now, I think. And so to be sitting here with you, and you may not like this term, but you're a legend in your field. And I knew I'd get that reaction, but you've had an opportunity to sit down and have conversations with people that are some of the greatest names to ever play the game. And yet this is not going to be another golf interview or golf conversation. So we're gonna take a little bit of different twist. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about, or have you talk a little bit about Five Clubs, what that's all about. You know, I'm not the best golfer, but I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast, watching the interviews, the conversations you have. I mean, it's, even if you're not a golf fan per se, the content it's enlightening, it's inspiring. And I love the story. And I tried to guess at what Five Clubs was when we talked the other day, and I was completely off. And then I tried to describe it to my son, who's 18, and told him about Five Clubs. And he said, I thought there was more than 5 clubs in the golf bag. And then he asked if you were one of the founding members of golf. I'm like, I made that part up. I don't want to throw my son under. But I read a little bit about it. Robert Lockhart comes over from Scotland, buys equipment from old Tom Morris.
Yeah.
And then he gives this equipment to John Reed. John Reed starts this little club, and it becomes the Apple Tree Gang. And so tell me a little bit more about, look, I've done my research. So, but that's about all I know. So,
well, first of all, it's, if we don't need another example of how circuitous a route life is, that you and I are sitting here getting ready to have this conversation. The Five Clubs, first of all, Five Clubs was, the genesis of it was that I needed something. I didn't know what I needed once my mind started to get clear. But Five Clubs is it's derived from, there were 5 clubs that made up the original construct of the United States Golf Association. And this was back in the late 1890s, 1894, 1895. And so we didn't look at ourselves as, well, look at us, we're going to be what the USGA currently is now. But the USGA, they had modest ambitions, but they thought they could grow and hopefully make a contribution. And that's really, at its essence, that's what Five Clubs was intended to be, which was foundational with an aspiration to grow and hopefully contribute. And, you know, it's interesting. We're about 2.5 years into it, and we've got an aggregate of voices that are different, all people who have, kind of different paths in the game. And they have the autonomy to do whatever they want, when they want, which is not something we all get in life. And again, these people that I'm talking about, whether it's Gil Hanse, who I would argue is the preeminent designer of golf courses in the world, Jay Billis, who is not, he doesn't come to Five Clubs through a life in golf, but golf is a big part of his life as somebody who was a practicing attorney and obviously the leading voice, not only in college basketball, but college athletics. And we have a college golfer, Emma Carpenter, and we have two guys who played professionally at the highest level. And they have, like I said, the autonomy to use their time any way they want. But at the end, we'd like to believe that we have one thing that's absolutely in common. We do love golf. And what you do find, and what I've found in my years playing the game, being around it, covering it, is there are a lot of things about golf, playing golf, that are applicable to what we deal with every day in life, kind of leaning on others. There's a competitive bent. Life is competitive, but we need other people. Like I don't want to play alone, and I don't get anything really out of playing golf if I'm not with other people. And now more than ever, with where you and I are in our lives, fellowship is essential, and it's nourishing. And so the game of golf has given me a great deal. And, there's some photos around this room of me with my dad. I loved golf because it gave me uninterrupted time with the most important person in my life. And so that will never go away. Like, why do I love this? Well, I love it because, again, I love where it started, and that was with him.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your dad, and you and I share that in common too, where we both lost our fathers. And I had a friend of mine who said something pretty profound to me. He said, there's two things in your life as a man that will deeply impact you unlike anything else. And one is having the birth of your first child. And then the second is losing your dad. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about, did he go by Bucky?
He went by Bucky as a kid.
Okay.
He was an only child, which is an interesting thing to examine, because I think only children, this is not a broad sweeping generalization. You get so much attention, right, especially if you're coming from a home full of love, that I think you would maybe develop a predisposition to some level of entitlement, and maybe even some selfishness. And again, like I said, I'm not making that as a generalization about all only children, but my dad found brotherhood with men and women in his life to a degree that they were his oxygen. I said, paraphrasing those words when I eulogized him. But you're right. My two daughters who are in this house right now, and shockingly are being quiet, and they're not 12 years old. They're college age kids. When that happens, and as a father, you know this, something happens to you it's unattainable until they enter this world. And that is an unconditional position, intellectually and psychologically, that I as much as I love my wife, I could not have. But my love and admiration and appreciation for my wife was galvanized even more when I saw what had just happened with the birth of a child. That is something that is so powerful. You do your best to articulate it, and I'm sure you have, about your own children. And then the father-child, and in our case, father-son relationship. A very good friend of mine who lost his father a couple years before I lost mine, and when my dad passed, said something to me that I thought was actually hurtful when he said it to me. But he was just telling me the truth to condition me. And he was like, I'm not going to wait to tell you this down the road. You need to understand it now. And what he said was, this will never get easier. His loss is never going to ease on you. Because knowing the relationship you had with him, it's always going to be right there. And as I share this with you right now, my dad passed away 12 and a half years ago. It's right there. Yep. His loss, his absence in my life, it's a hole blown in me that can't be made whole. I think studying, examining, talking about grief is really important. And I've done that. I've done that as I've tried to, walk this path of sobriety with people, and try to understand, what his death. It's not about what role it played in me falling into the depths of alcoholism, but that loss, that relationship was so significant, so profound, that I'll spend my life living with it being right on the precipice of continuing kind of grief, sorrow, celebration. It's not all sadness.
Right.
And it's the one thing, Dean, I will tell you that, and I've learned this by talking about it with therapists, which is I'm not a greedy person, but his loss made me greedy, not only for myself, but for my children, for my nieces, for my nephews, for my mother, for my wife, for my sisters. He was such a light and such a force of nature that I'm greedy that they didn't have more of him. It wasn't just me, it was others.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's a common misconception, that you've got to somehow dwindle down the grief level. And you and I've shared this, that my dad was 8 years ago in December. And I was just back down in Florida and got to sit on the bench where he passed away. And just, it wasn't a grieving moment of tears as much as it was just remembering how incredible of a man he was. And there was a time when I felt the weight of not meeting the expectations of a man that I looked up to so much. And it was a more joyous moment because of our journeys and where we are now. It was a celebration of just sitting there and thinking, man, my dad would be proud of where I'm at now.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a great feeling. But I mean, it doesn't go away, and it comes up at the most inopportune times. It can be a commercial on TV, probably a Publix commercial. Those are the worst because they bring those things out in you. Why am I crying at a grocery store commercial? But it's profound, and I don't want it to go away. And I'm sure you feel the same way. I love that I've got that, and that I can share that with my kids. And so we'd also need to talk about our mom. So my mom's still living, and absolutely her social calendar is bigger than mine, and she's always doing something. It's just incredible to watch her do that. She was sharing with me this morning on the way over here that she's done this cooking show yesterday, and she's hanging out with her friends, and she's got this whole schedule. One of the gifts, and this may mean something to you, one of the gifts of sobriety and not being a self-centered brat, is that I get to call my mom almost every day and get to talk to her in the mornings. And so she did say, look, you need to ask Gary a question from me. She was a teacher for almost 40 years. She said, I want to know what kind of student he was, and would I have wanted to teach him in the 4th grade?
Wow. God, I mean, first of all, I have my mom, and my mom is turning 84, literally within the days of us doing this. The answer to your question, to your mom's question, was I was a good student. I did not achieve to the level that I should have, and I'm not saying that like, well, I'm a real intellectual. I did what I needed to do, and it was probably a precursor to other things that I then wound up finding myself doing, which was skirting around things. And so, but oddly enough, the 4th grade was a pretty good time for me. Mrs. Lumberg was my 4th grade teacher, and I was the president of the class the first month of the year. It was her last year teaching, and she got to handpick her class. Nobody else knew this. This was learned, literally years later. And so I love being vocal. I love to express myself. I wanted to be a leader. And she gave me, at the end of that year, a book that meant very little to me then, because I didn't understand kind of the poignancy of it, and also the point she was making. She gave me a copy of The Red Badge of Courage. Not exactly the kind of book you give to a 4th grader, but she thought I was equipped to handle it. And my mother, who was a literature major herself, and still to this day, very, very, she leans into the academic side of things, and she lives in Chapel Hill and still exposes herself to the university. So I was a pretty good student in fourth grade, and I wasn't trying to bullshit people. I did invest in that at the time. By high school, again, I did what I needed to do and was lucky enough to go to a very good school, but I did not achieve to the level that I should have. But fourth grade I might have been peaking.
I think you would have done well. She was my teacher for a short amount of time when I was in, I think, 10th grade. She had substituted, and she was reminding me the other day that I had drawn some picture on the desk with pencil, and it was some kid picking his nose. And she realized, like, maybe my son should play sports. But she said she did like the picture. It was a really good picture. So that was my experience with my mom. But I'm not sure I was the ideal fourth grade student. So, well, and it kind of translates into your career path, which if I'm kind of reading a lot of the information, your background, and you and I've talked, I mean, it was kind of unconventional getting to where you did.
Sure.
And yet always coming back to this love of the game of golf and maybe a bit of an infatuation with golf. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of how you got, that gap between college and what you were doing, and then really jumping into the golf as your central career.
Yeah, I going back to early on, and it was an indicator of comfort of something that is not comfortable for most people, and that is expressing yourself in front of other people. And it was just as a precursor to give you an idea of where my motivation came from. Second grade at our church, the Church of Nativity in Midland Park, New Jersey, the Monsignor went to my mother and said, "Do you think Gary would want to read the nativity scene for our Christmas pageant?" And my wife said, "Yeah, I think he would do it." And he said, "Well, there's a microphone." And she said, "Well, then he'll definitely do it." That's a true story. And so I liked it, and was comfortable with it. Didn't find anxiety associated with public speaking, which is, again, if you talk about asking what they are clinically, people's greatest fears, right behind death is
right.
Public speaking. So I liked it. So I did it when I was, in high school, and would call high school football games and wrote for the paper. And I'll never forget when it came to like observing things and then wanting to talk about it. I was 12 years old watching the national championship game between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, 1979 NCAA championship game, still to this day, the highest rated college basketball game ever. And there was another guy on Michigan State's team. His name was Greg Kelser. He was a fabulous college player, and he had a pretty good professional career. He got in foul trouble, and I audibly said this out loud as a 12-year-old watching the game. Well, okay, him being in foul trouble, I said this to my dad watching the game. That's worse than Magic. And I'd seen these guys a couple times. It wasn't like you watched a lot of college basketball back then. And as soon as I said that, Al McGuire, who was doing the game with Billy Packer and Dick Enberg, said Greg Kelser getting in foul trouble is an enormous problem, even more so than if Magic did. Now, it wasn't like Al McGuire was some prophet, but I'm like, well, I just had that observation. Right. And I'm like, okay, I like this. I like observing the performance of elite athletes. And so I was not somebody who wanted to necessarily be around these people. I found it extraordinary what they did. Mm-hmm. So when I got out of school, and I was a golf professional, club professional for 5 years, and I realized I didn't want that as a life. I saw it at a very high level, very, very quickly, and went, I don't want to do this. And told my parents, and they're like, well, then don't do it. Like, first of all, it's your life. It's not like we're going to look at you as if you're a failure because you decided. And I've actually subsequently leaned on a book. I think you and I have talked about this book. It's by David Epstein. It's called Range. And it's how generalists thrive in a specialized world. Like, don't be afraid to quit. Like, quitting takes courage. Not all the time. I'm not associating quitting with courage universally. But if you're doing something and you don't like it, and you may be getting something out of it monetarily, and you're going, God, I don't want to, this is a really good gig, but I'm not stimulated by it. It wasn't that I was making a ton of money, but I wasn't looking at this going, I'm going to like this. So I decided I was going to make a change. And by happenstance, had a conversation with a guy who was managing a bunch of radio stations. One of them was they were CBS owned, a cluster of stations. And one of them was a sports talk radio formatted station. And they wanted to do a golf show on the weekends. And he's like, you think you could do that? Want to do it? I'm like, are you kidding? Talking about golf, which is what I've just come out of, which is a lifelong passion. And that's where it started. And that was in 1998. So yeah, I mean, it was by happenstance. Would I have found my path? I'd like to believe that I would have, because I felt like I was equipped to do it. Because like you, and I say this about people who want to get into broadcast journalism, being front facing and being seen, or not being seen, but expressing yourself, you gotta like come to this with an ease about it. Like, you can't learn how to be comfortable talking.
Right.
That's not necessarily acquired. You can absolutely get better at all of the things that we pursue, but the gift of gab is kind of a prerequisite. Right. And those who are great at it don't learn that, they possess it.
Right. Well, when you were in fourth grade, or when you were 12, you would have been, what, seventh grade?
Yeah.
And you pictured a future in broadcasting. Would you ever have imagined, and I know this, I think I know the answer, but I'd just love to hear it. Would you ever have imagined that you'd be talking with some of the greatest names in the history of the sport?
No. And even, look, my conversations that I've been lucky enough to have with Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson, Tom Watson, and good fortune is an understatement. But, I was, even prior to really narrowing my focus in golf, Bill Russell, and Joe Montana, and Tom Brady, and Michael Jordan, and Magic Johnson, and Kobe Bryant, and Serena Williams, and Venus Williams. And like, I loved doing that stuff. I mean, I'd like to aspire to still have that, because I think as much as Five Clubs is concentrated on golf being the foundational piece to it, there are a lot of people who have achieved many, many things in all walks of life, not necessarily just sports, that have golf as an outlet to some degree. And so, we do that. We do talk to people who, are not just, but yeah, I mean, no, I didn't think that. No, I didn't think that the last on television conversation that Gary Player, Lee Trevino, Jack Nicklaus, and Arnold Palmer did together, I was conducting that interview. I'm not saying I could have or should have walked at that point, which was the fall of 2015, but that would have been a good exit strategy. I mean, come on, man.
What's going to be better than that?
Yeah.
Well, you're here with me, Gary. And
yeah, exactly.
Look,
and
I don't
here
wanna...
it took almost 10 years, but we have climbed another rung.
Your career, and we've talked about this a lot, and what I Love You, period, really is about, and it's about redemption, and it's about this unconditional love, and it's about finding ourselves in places. And really, the only way you can find out what those things mean is when you really need them most. Mm-hmm. And so, for people who don't understand what we share in the disease of alcoholism, and I get it. I mean, in fairness, most people don't operate the way we do or think the way we do, and they think,
thank God they don't.
Right. how can you have all these things? Life's going well for you, and yet you're just completely throwing away your life.
Mm-hmm.
You're destroying everything around you. You're completely self-centered. My own story of being just completely self-centered, and just the detestable behavior that would go along with that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet feeling like I needed to portray this image. And we were kidding a little bit earlier about the stories and the lengths that we would go to
insane behavior
to uphold that image. And so here you are, arguably, like you just said, you're at this height of your career, everything you could have imagined and wanted, and yet finding yourself on this destructive train that is just barreling down the tracks, and it's like you just couldn't get off of it. So, I want to hear a little bit more about that from you. We've talked about that and shared our stories, but that idea of isolating and finding yourself alone, but not wanting to be alone, but feeling like that's the only place you could be. And tell me a little bit about that, and then rock bottom. Or, for me, I felt like I probably scraped across the bottom a few times, but talk a little bit about that.
It's, as you and I try to embark upon basically examining the disease and trying to live a life of recovery. This is, and look, early on, it seemed glib to me when people would say to me, just for today, but that's what it is. And so, I wake up every day with untreated alcoholism. It's my responsibility to treat it. And we have methods and a program to do that. I can't do it alone. But to your question, that's one of the there are many paradoxes to the disease. And it took me time, and it's going to take me my life to fully understand all of them. But there are a lot of them. And one of them for me was what made a lot of this very confounding. One, there weren't consequences early. And I was experiencing an ascendancy professionally without suffering consequences personally yet that made it seem there was something that was counterintuitive to the way that I expected life to be. Like, if I'm doing destructive things to myself and incrementally, like a weird kind of form of erosion to all those people around me, why am I not suffering the consequences of this? So there is a rationalization and a justification to behavior that was compounding itself on an everyday basis. So it's like, I can't have a problem. If I have a problem, then why am I not suffering from this problem? And again, you'd rationalize how you felt physically. You'd get past the challenges spiritually, which by the end, I was so hollowed out, I wasn't doing any examination of how destitute I was spiritually. So that duality of things are too good for this to be true. But it wasn't as if I didn't have thoughts in the recesses of my mind that, wait a second, man, you are a fairly disciplined person. You do have a more than a modicum of willpower. You're fairly vigilant about things, like you're not entirely reckless in these other departments of your life. So I started to, whether it was look at things, read stuff. And what I was reading was things that did not include the idea of total abstinence. Like that was way too big for me to even ponder that. And then, the other thing that I found out once I put my hand up and said, I can't do this anymore, is that very few people that I've met And I've yet to meet the one who came in on a winning streak.
Right.
Just,
Right.
you know, it took consequences. It took me being on the precipice, and I lost things that I may never get back, that were devastating to me. But here's the thing. And maybe this was the reason why I can sit here today with some hope, and with a fair amount of faith, is that I did a lot of blaming because I was so jaded. I was so cynical. But once I said, I can't do this anymore, and I started to build some days with my mind getting, but even that took time and relapse. I never looked out at, you know, kind of the playing field and went, you're the fucking reason I'm here.
Right.
And you're to blame for this. I am the architect of my consequences solely. But it doesn't mean that, you know, when you start to examine the disease that, and in this, I don't say this for myself, and I know you feel the same way. I'm not jumping up and down trying to explain to you why it is I had no choice. What I'm telling you is have compassion for others who find themselves in this place, because when the disease gets a grip of you, your behavior is unimaginable. And it's also hard to explain, not only to other people, but to yourself. Like when you start to do things that are so counter to the way that you'd like to believe you'd be in life, it is a disease. I had choices about a lot of stuff, but there are certain things that I did that, again, people who don't think like you and I do go, how could he do that? It's because it's got a hold on you in a way that you do things that are hard to explain.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes into this idea of shame versus redemption. And shame, what I've found is we walk in, as you said, nobody walks in a winner. I mean, everybody walks in with just immense shame. And there's part of that, it's like a cloak that you wear that feels noble to wear, like this is my life. And yet that shame was what was cycling me back through the drinking and the depression, and then, you know, the anxiety, and then feeling like, you know, I was a piece of shit and that's all I'll ever be. And then there's this redemption piece where, as we talk about it, this spiritual awakening piece that we had really kind of pushed away, because part of that is, and again, part of the I Love You period journey is this awareness that God doesn't want us to live in this shame. He wants us to live in redemption. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more from you, how that has changed. And some of that is, and I know it's a little cliche, it's forgiving yourself. The thing that I've dealt with the most was nobody's voice was more critical than my own. And for God really to say, hey, I love you with a period on the end. There's no conditions, no requirements, when everybody around me seemed to be doing that. And I was putting conditions and requirements on myself. So that redemptive piece is huge. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, all those things are really interesting and great points. Martyrdom was a big part of the way I was. It was also a fair amount of the way I was early on in sobriety as well. And that's part of the condition of the level of ego that I possessed. But look, what you're doing in the grand scheme of things, as people start to understand what it is that you're trying to share with people, is in order for us to be able to give the way that we would like to believe we want to. And I think the human condition, when our minds are truly clear and not dull, but clear, and it's been clinically proven, our inclination is for them to drift to things that matter most to us. And those are things other than ourselves. But the only way to get to that place is to give yourself a break. And you and I and everybody else that gets, you know, taken into the abyss of this disease, God, the last thing I did was love myself. God, did I have some self-loathing and shame? Shame is real. It's palpable. It's so presentable in the way that your body language is when you finally say, I can't do this anymore. But the martyrdom that you're talking about, like, God, did I wrap myself in a cloak of that? Because first of all, I could only see things the way it benefited me. That's how myopic I was about life, because I was so consumed by the way that my days were. My days were reduced to making sure I had enough alcohol to get through the day, manage the things that I needed to do. So everything in my way, I eventually viewed as an impediment to the only thing that mattered to me. And this is also coinciding with the people in my life being angry with me, not only because many of them weren't aware to the depths of my drinking, angry about the fact that I was becoming increasingly more selfish, more self-centered, which was not a complete departure, but a fairly significant departure from the way that I had formerly been. And so here I am. It's like, how dare you be that way with me? And I would have conversations with myself. Boy, they were animated. And I'm screaming at people that are not even there, and it was, so I saw the world in the way that I saw it. And it was not personal, but it was the way that I had become. I was sick. And then once you start to get well, then it's like, now you're starting to experience something that again, I didn't have my equilibrium yet. It's like, look at me, like, hey, look what I've been through.
Right.
Now I'm not suggesting I was projecting this publicly, but I thought it. Hell yeah, I thought it. Like, don't you know what I've been through? It's not about trying to absolve myself of my responsibility in getting to where I got. But in order for you and me and countless other people who get to this point of where they're just a wreckage site. That's all you are. You are physically beat up, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, spiritually. You're wreckage, man. And until you start with this modicum of giving yourself a break, and then beyond that, then you start to say, have compassion for yourself. You're not absolving yourself of things. You're not trying to forget your behavior. You're not going, hey, look, just remember, hey, look, I got to I've got to get out of jail free card. No, it's not that.
Right.
But then you get to where there's empathy for yourself. And then I think that's the road of redemption. It starts there. It can't be achieved. And redemption that's a powerful thing. I mean, when people redeeming themselves, most importantly in the eye of their beholder, which is, there's nothing more significant than that. And with that comes a humility that I couldn't have achieved prior. And then there's something that I feel today that is unequivocally the most amazing thing that I feel now, which is grace. Like, my God, that was a Rubicon that I never thought I could ever cross again. And with grace comes these other things like peace of mind. And when your mind is so wrecked by the deceit, the dishonesty, the disloyalty, all the things that come with these garden variety behaviors, which are a byproduct of being overcome by this disease, those things seem like, don't talk to me about those things. I just want to get through the day, man. And then you start to put some days together and your mind gets a little bit clearer and you start to listen to people that are not speaking to you in a way that's like, let me teach you, my son. It's, let me just tell you what I went through. And it's like, oh my God, you did? So did I. Like, I thought I was the only one who thought that. I thought I was the only one who behaved that way. I thought I was the only one who walked around the neighborhood and put vodka bottles here, there, and everywhere. So when I walked the dog, I could satisfy myself. And it's like, God, you did that? Yeah, I did. That's what I did. And my wife would be like, she never expressed like, how did you get drunk in 15 minutes walking the dog? I don't know. But I do know because that's what it does. The behavior is unimaginable. It's insane behavior. So when you start to come out of that and you get beyond, days, months, and you start to share yourself with other people and they share their own vulnerabilities. And there is a relatability that you thought was something like, come on, man, I was the only unicorn out there on the prairie. Nobody thought the way that I did. And you start to hear this stuff every day. There's a comfort that comes with that. And then ultimately for me, there's a level of grace that's felt that, again, you never thought that could be achieved. And that's, again, these are things that only come with time and only come with people who have the willingness. And that's where the miracle is. It's like, I didn't know you when you were at your depths. And I don't need to see it, but you know that I can feel it.
Right.
Because it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but there's a relatability there that you and I find comfort in. That I'm telling you, it's the only way that I can make progress going forward and feel a sense of encouragement and a sense of comfort. Because in the absence of that, because I've done it, I've done a little bit and then neglected paying attention, doing the things and making it feel, Dean, as if these things were a burden. Really? Really? But I mean, again, I heard this early on as I filibuster here, sitting not far removed from feeling as hopeless as I've ever felt, sitting in Northern Maryland in a treatment facility, listening to a guy on a Sunday night talking about his own journey. And I looked at him and I went, Jesus, really? You look like things are going okay for you. And he talked about how, yeah, the disease is baffling. It's cunning. It's powerful. And then he paused and he said, and it's patient. And it's just waiting for you to believe that you have either got it or you've got this framework or you've got this understanding that now allows you to close up that kit and move on to the next task. And I got there. I've gotten there several times where it's like, hey, I'm good.
Right. You talk about grace, Gary, and it's I get it. When you talk about it, it just does something to my soul, thinking about people that have shown me grace and the damage control that we tried to do when we were not well. And then you get to a place where you finally come clean, that you talk about that freedom of honesty. And you realize the overwhelming sense that I'm not going to be able to control this damage. I'm not going to be able to make amends for everything that I've done. And so much of that is, as we talk about, is living out an amends, which is what we're prayerfully doing here in life now. But I want to hear a little bit, or at least maybe a story from you about a moment where you were, and I don't know, maybe that's Julie, giving you grace. And I know you've talked a little bit about that. And I know that's just an incredible story that I know the world wants to hear.
Yeah, and there have been many. I mean, I've gotten it from, one of the other things before I share this story is, I became so isolated, not only physically, but also, psychologically. I didn't want anybody's help. And it wasn't just help with the idea that I needed help. It was just anything. My equilibrium was shot. My mind was one track on not only, the necessity and the need for alcohol, but I didn't want anybody to contribute to my life. And in turn, I wasn't really capable of contributing to other people's lives. I might have been there, but I sure as hell wasn't present. I wasn't investing in other people. A friend of mine gave me a book, and this was years before I got help. And I've never asked him this, and I don't want to put him on the spot because I don't want him to say, well, yeah, I did. Or for him to feel clumsy and say, no, I didn't. But he gave me a book when I'm pretty certain that he thought I needed help. And it was a book by Adam Grant called Give and Take. And it's not something that's a clinical examination of those things as it pertains to alcoholism. It's about how that reciprocity is vital to having a balance in your life. Like, you have to contribute. It can't be a one-way street. Like, hey, come on, what's in it for me? Look, we'd like to think that there are things that are going to come our way, and it's not all materialistic, but that was, that's where I was. I was on tilt. I wasn't contributing to others. And if I did, it was accidental. And I'm not saying that in a brazen way. I'm saying that in a, and I can't sit here and feel shame about it. It's just the reality of it. That's where I was. But early on, where I was with respect to how compromised I was, I couldn't contribute much to our family late in my drinking because, whether it was go get this or do that or go to this or just be there. And again, like if I might have been there, but I wasn't present. And so each day and every day, by and large, was reduced to kind of an inquisition, interrogation exercise that occurred usually in the foyer of our home. And that was me getting home, which essentially whatever the end of the day was. And it was usually with me being impaired and my wife fearing that I hopefully hadn't harmed myself or someone else. And so we would meet in the foyer. And, there was some relief on her part that, okay, he's home. And I subjected her to this every day. And if I didn't, that was accidental. I was out of town but it did, theoretically I was doing this to her every day. So when I got help, our younger daughter had gotten her driver's license, but we didn't want her to drive after dark. And so she was going to a lacrosse game. And my wife said to me, will you pick her and Emma up from this game and drive them home? And you have to understand that for everybody else, for the most part, that's an easy ask. Those are simple tasks that are done every day, all over the place by moms and dads. It's just, that's life. But it wasn't our life because I wasn't capable of contributing that simple thing. So that ask alone was such an extension of something that had been stripped away from our home, which was the trust, that simple trust to just do that. So, my wife never went to bed before I got home. The light was on in the foyer and we would have that moment of tension, friction, and discomfort. And then the day would end. And I mean, okay, so I could never put myself in her position, but I can only imagine, like, okay, I'm sure she easily fell asleep each night after that exercise. On the contrary. Now, I would pass out. So that evening when I got home, there were a couple things that were very different about our home. The light was not on in the foyer, and my wife was not waiting for me. She was in our room asleep. Think about what I had deprived her of for years. That ability to do what all people should be able to do, rely on your spouse to contribute to the family, and not, on the contrary, put you in a position of maybe experiencing PTSD. So again, I go back to that as something that I had taken from others, and in a way deprived myself of. And I don't know, did I need to experience the depths of that disease to reclaim, the sense of peace that is associated with knowing that the other people in my house are at peace themselves? I don't know, but I did. So when I was in a position to be impacted by that, it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming to open the door to my bedroom to see somebody who'd been deprived of that every day. Every day.
Gary, I think those things, while painful to talk through, I would contend again, in the spirit of what we are trying to do here, that those redemptive moments of grace are what make you who you are now. And you think about over history and all the different characters that have impacted. Yeah, I think of like Winston Churchill and his relative small window of impact. And if you look at his life as a whole and you pick out most snippets, of course, I'm not sure it's ever been substantiated, but he certainly had a drinking issue.
Oh, no, he absolutely was one of us.
So
I'm actually looking at a book that I was advised to read when I was in treatment called A First-Rate Madness. And it's an examination of public lives who suffered from, not necessarily all of them alcoholism, but many of them alcoholics, which also was running, hand in hand with depression. And he was one of them. Mm-hmm. And how he, his view of the world was impacted not only by the disease of alcoholism, but by his own depressive state. And that many people historically, whether it be him, whether it be Gandhi, whether it be John F. Kennedy, and I'm not suggesting Kennedy was an alcoholic, but depression, that they saw the world with an empathy because they had done some introspection of their own. Again, not studied enough while they were living, but posthumously, Churchill, most definitely. And I may give you that book as you walk out the door.
Yeah, and so I think those are the areas where, when we live in that redemption and we have that story, that's the gift of the story, to where you and I can talk about it now, and to somebody who's maybe trying to figure out, man, what if I come clean with the world? Is life over? And you and I had those same feelings, and it's madness. It's absolute madness. And yet when you finally get to that place and then you look back now with just a little bit of time here, and to be able to say with all honesty, you don't regret your story. Even though there's lots of people that you've hurt and we've hurt, and you can't always make amends directly to those people. but you have a story now, and I think that's the beauty of what we're talking about. So I think about where you were, your 20-something-year-old self with aspirations, and where you are now. What was a life that matters, a legacy that matters then, as you thought about it, if you can even remember kind of, was I even thinking about those things, versus now, when you think about a legacy, it's all this other stuff that we put so much importance on, and you've been around it, and you've seen a lot of that. And so now thinking about your legacy now versus where you were before.
Yeah, legacy is an interesting word. It's one that it gets batted around a lot in my line of work. What's his legacy? What's her legacy? It's actually misunderstood as by definition, but by a lot of people. When I was younger, like you, I had certain aspirations, certain goals, some of them personal, some of them professional. Many of them were in the abstract. Like I thought, okay, yes, absolutely, I want to get married. I want to do what my parents did, really, really well without any type of guidebook, which was have a respectful and loving marriage, raise children. So I absolutely wanted that. And then professionally, once I found where I knew I was going to be stimulated and motivated supremely, which was in broadcasting, there were certain things that I wanted to do. There weren't things that I said, I want to cover that. I saw it more in the abstract. And to certain degrees, I feel like I touched those things. I'm reluctant to say I achieved those things. Many of those things are fluid. You and I were talking about the concept of change before we started. There's a great line attributed to several people, one of whom is somebody I was lucky enough to have a relationship with, Arnold Palmer, that success is always under construction. And I think that, yes, when you achieve certain things, life is meant to be celebrated. It's precious. And my father my dad was, again, as an only child, maybe it was a little counterintuitive to him being a great teammate, but he was in terms of being a collegiate athlete. He was as a leader of men and women organizationally. But he said one of life's greatest rewards is collective achievement, sharing those things with each other, not the culmination of it, but looking back on, the futility of failing at certain things and then figuring certain things out. So like I looked at aspirations as, yes, I wanted to do certain things, been lucky enough to have done many of them. And there are a lot of people who I worked with. There are a lot of people I grew up with, friends who have known me my whole life, who have said this. And it wasn't that I didn't acknowledge that what they were saying to me wasn't true, because it was, but it was almost like, but I don't want to acknowledge it in a boastful way. Many of the people that have known me my whole life said, you're the only one who actually did what he wanted to do. And to a degree, that is true. Like, I wanted to do the things that I've done. And I wanted that when I was 9, 11, 15. And I'm exceedingly proud of my friends for the successes they've had in life, starting with, leading, admirable lives and then achieving certain things. And so that alone, like, I've done what I wanted to do. And so, as much as I found myself in the depths of the disease of alcoholism, and I'm not suggesting that during those darkest days, months, years, that I was still going, but I still love what I do. I wasn't projecting that, but I didn't, at my core, I never lost sight of the fact that what I did was what I wanted to do and what I've always wanted to do. And so when people, will periodically say, well, God, that's this and that's that. And boy, getting up at 3:00 in the morning. Yeah, it's unorthodox. It never got normal. But as I said, I'm not breaking rocks, man. I mean, this is the toy department.
Right.
Oh my God, are you kidding? Like, okay, we cover a golf tournament. And when the golf tournament's over, here's what you're going to have to do. We were going to do a 2-hour show, but now we're going to do 4. That's all? Why can't we do 6? I mean, it's just gas bag. Just being able to do what I've done. And I'm not trying to make this look like it's Pollyanna. It's not. I mean, but I've achieved a lot of the things that I wanted to, but I still, like with 5 clubs, like this thing is a piece of clay. And as I've said to some people, and I don't mean this to, and I've got one particular friend who's from the state of Iowa, but there are times I felt like the offensive coordinator for the Iowa football team. Like, okay, we got a yard. Okay, now we're going to lose 3. And maybe eventually we'll get a first down. Who knows? Maybe before the end of the first half. Like, it's felt like that at times. But there are also days that I'm like, God, that was a win. We're moving the ball, we're matriculating the ball down the field here. There's still a lot that I want to do. But back to your original question, I looked at life when I finally found my path as, yeah, that would be great. And I definitely want to do those things. But I didn't say, and I want to call a World Series, or I want to cover the Masters. Maybe I did say that. Maybe I did say that. And I've been lucky enough to cover many of them. And now there are things more specific. There are things that I don't really, it's not a question of reluctance to share them. But maybe it is. And maybe they're not crystallized to the degree yet that I'm ready to say, yeah, I want to do this. But I do want to dig in on things that I'm passionate about, showing people places that are special and having conversations with people that have inspired other people, that have inspired me. And oh, by the way, some of whom have been riddled with this disease. Having an hour-long conversation, it wasn't entirely devoted to alcoholism, but when Tom Watson is willing to share his own vulnerabilities about being in the grips of this disease, that's a pretty special day for me. And so, yeah, that's a box checked.
Well, and I think you and I have talked a lot about it, and maybe I've been a small part of inspiring you that your story is so impactful. It's been inspirational to me, and you've done such a masterful job of sharing other people's stories. And you and I share the same fascination with people, and really genuinely, even when I was in my worst days, still had a genuine fascination like you do of talking to other people, hearing their stories. But your story, that's why we wanted to talk with you, is to hear your story of redemption. So, as I kind of think wrapping up this conversation, you made me think we need to sit down and talk again about our dad's wisdom and really as it relates to leadership and organizational culture. And you and that's another conversation we'll have. But
see, and Dean, this is where, I don't need explanations as to why things are bigger than me and you. And again, I'm not suggesting that when I was, sitting in a closet with a handle of vodka that I still knew that there were things that were greater than me. But it didn't take much time for me to know that. I always knew that. I knew it when my dad was passing. I've always known that. But like, you and I have talked a little bit about, with the position that you're in, not only professionally, but personally now. And as you take on this passion project, like why were you inserted into my life? And why is it that I know there are things that my dad taught to leaders of companies, not only through the last chapter of his professional career, but even beyond that, when he was working at the University of North Carolina's business school, about concepts and practices and principles that are about, leading people and inspiring people in a work environment that, you're going to see as we start to share these things, and maybe we'll share them more with an audience as well. Like you're going to see a relatability. You're going to go, good God, really?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is that happening? Like, I don't need people to explain it to me because first of all, you probably couldn't, but I don't know why you were inserted in my life, but you were. And that's grace right there. Like, I don't know why I was given that gift. I don't know why. Here's what I do know is that my willingness to appreciate that gift is something I could not have felt, couldn't have been penetrated by not that long ago when I was ill from this disease.
And that's the beauty now that you and I talk about all the time and just smile that we were the lone wolves and thought that was really cool, you know. And there's some weird attraction that we have, even though we're absolutely designed and wired to be communal and relational. And that's what we really ultimately wanted, and we couldn't find it in a bottle. And so now we have these, it's like they were there all along, but you have this big network of friends that it's like, wow, I have all these friends. And it's like, well, they were there the whole time. You just were kind of ignoring them. But
Totally.
but that relational piece now that we have is it's just such a gift, and it really is a gracious gift. So for you and I to be able to even look up and acknowledge one another is part of the redemption story of how we've gotten here. So I like to have you share as we kind of end this conversation. You know, you and I have such a heart for people that are still struggling. Mm. I mean, it's just when you've been there, whether that's alcoholism, really just any sort of addictive behavior, and that sense of hopelessness that we know more than anyone what that feels like. I'd like to hear an I love you period kind of message of love and hope from your heart to those individuals.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I've experienced, and I know you have, when you surround yourself with people who think the way that we do, is that as clouded and as hollowed out and as numb as we were, and as it doesn't matter whether you're 2 years removed, 5 years removed, 50 years removed. Here's one thing that is irrefutable. You never forget exactly how you felt, what you thought. Like that's another one of the paradoxes of the disease. Like, how do you remember all that? Well, I'm not saying that I remember specifically what I did after, I drank a fifth of vodka, but I know a lot of how I felt, what I thought, and those things I think are very useful for people who need help. And again, the thing about seeking it, wanting it, and even for people right now who are not seeking it or wanting it, and are feeling totally hopeless, first of all, that is not an uncommon condition. There are very few people who find themselves in the depths of alcoholism who felt at that moment either a great deal of hope or a lot of faith. They probably were void of both. I'm exhibit A, you're right there with me. And what happens is that you do not have to think about the rest of your life. You don't, and I can promise you, and believe me, thinking about the rest of your life or thinking about things that you associate with drinking, which for me was everything, that seems like too much to ponder. Of course it's too much to ponder. I remember audibly sharing this with my wife, and it seems comical now. But and again, I'm not embarrassed to share this. I thought to myself, well, how am I going to do this? Like, I won't even be able to toast our daughters at their wedding. Oh my God, really? What a sacrifice. But that's what the disease does to you. Your life is reduced to everything you do being associated with it. Good days, bad days, start of vacation, end of vacation, a promotion, a firing, everything, waking up, going to bed. So what I say is that don't think about next week. Don't think about next year. Don't think about the totality of what is required to try to find hope or try to find faith. I'm just telling you, just today, just surround yourself, listen to others, and here's what you'll find is that nobody is trying to give you the answers. All they're trying to do is provide you with something that, my God, you probably haven't experienced in a while, an absence of judgment and a whole lot of compassion. Because it's not that the people who love you or care for you don't have that anymore. They're scared. They're frustrated. They're bewildered. They're at a loss. They don't know what to do because you're doing things that make no sense to them. So just extend your hand, and what you're going to find is that, yeah, the days are long. They're long, but exhale. Do something you haven't probably done in a while, which is consciously breathe and give your body a break, give your mind a break. And what starts to happen is that something that is probably dark, which is your heart, starts to find light. And I'm not suggesting it happens tomorrow, but you know what? Tomorrow comes after the first day that you give up. And I'm not saying that is easily achieved. For crying out loud, it was hard for me, so much so that, you know what? I went back out and did it again. But this is self-fulfilling. You've seen it, I've seen it, and it comes with a word, a phrase, a story, the extended hand of somebody else who has thought the way that you have thought, felt the way that you have felt. And as much as you may think you're terminally unique, you're not. There's so many others. And what you're going to find is you're going to laugh at things that you do that you thought nobody else did. And the fact that you're going to be in a position to laugh about those things when now it's just an act of desperation to fill up shampoo bottles with vodka that you put in a guest room because that is where you've been reduced to, which was me. I still haven't met anybody who's done that.
That's a new one.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm not suggesting there isn't somebody out there because I know that there is. I just haven't yet found somebody who's done that. It takes a lot of hot water to absolve that bottle of the residue of that taste. And again, I smile at it, and it's not that I'm poking fun at it.
Right.
It's the reality of where you get to, which is unimaginable behavior, unrecognizable to the people who know you best. So no wonder they're angry and frustrated and scared and living in fear. And they feel, I promise you, as hopeless as you do. And the only way for them to reclaim any level of hope is for you to suddenly feel it yourself.
Redemption and hope. I mean, that's what it's all about. And I had one of those moments last night with my oldest son, and he just talked about the message of I love you, period. And really hadn't heard from him in this way, but he said that message has been so impactful as we've watched you go through this journey. It's been impactful to me and my siblings. And that really hit me last night. And your candor, Gary, and authenticity, which is a word that gets thrown around so much these days, and you and I probably threw it around in our worst days and acted like we were, just want to be authentic. But this truly is, and this is just another example of grace that God gives us, and love with no conditions and a period on the end. And so I want to give you a little merch for your
swag.
Yeah, a little swag. So you've got your own sweatshirt.
Outstanding. I will wear this proudly. The idea that I'm putting another hoodie in my closet, of which, again, my wife. There were a lot of behaviors that certainly were reflective of insanity. The number of hoodies that I have. Hey man, we do have addictive personalities.
This one goes in the front.
Yes. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Thank you for sitting down, and we'll have to do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother.
Amen.